dreaming in the dark. We are nothing more than dust. Search but you stay lost. We are reaching for the stars, but we're making this too hard. And I wonder where you are. Mysterious, that's the part you always show. 'Cause you're too curious. Maybe you should take it slow. Mysterious, that's the part you always show. 'Cause you're too curious. Maybe you should take it slow.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to episode 42 of Maker That Money, live here on the YouTubes with my good friend, my colleague, my compatriot, my rock, Mr. Andrew Mayhall of 3D Gloop. Andrew, how you doing this week?
I'm doing great. How are you, Pooch?
I am doing well. I had a very relaxing holiday week. I wish I could say that.
Fantastic.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, I wish I could say I was able to just like not do anything, but I'm not a creature that is capable of such things.
Yep.
I don't know
I know
about
how
you.
that is.
Yeah. So tried to take it slow. We the shop was shut down, so I gave my guys the week off. But I was there a little bit, poking around, doing some stuff. Did a lot of work from home. Did a lot of work on the house that has been some deferred
Nice.
maintenance. So that was nice. These are the things that I treat myself with for Christmas.
So you were paying off a few of the pieces of technical debt on your
technical
house, right?
debt on my house. Yes, and for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, look back at our episode on technical debt. Good stuff. Greetings to everybody joining us in the chat. Again, if you're listening back after the fact, we do this podcast live on YouTube every Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific. So feel free to join us sometimes. We do love getting interaction with you guys in the chat. You may hear us read off commentary on the chat. Also, we've got the handy dandy Maker That Money hotline link above. We are a call-in show if you want to call in and chat with us as well. We love getting your opinions, ideas, incorrect or otherwise. Yeah, I think that does it. Oh, where's my Mike, my favorite call to action hero in the chat? Never let the machines win.
Yeah.
Let's get the calls to action in. If you guys are with us, smash that like button, subscribe if you want more of this content. We do try to bunch this content under a specific playlist in YouTube because I know my YouTube channel is all over the place with instructional videos and build guides and all sorts of other stuff as well. But there is a nice organized playlist of all the Maker That Money podcast episodes, and you can find us as well everywhere that podcasts are found: Apple Music and Stitcher and Spotify and Pandora and
Man, that's a lot.
yeah, well, we use an awesome aggregator called Podbean. Shout out Podbean, not sponsored. That really does all that work for us. So that's kind of cool, huh? Good tip if anybody's looking to
Great.
get into podcasting. I think it's a very reasonably priced platform, and it's a nice little like one-stop shop for just pushing it out to everywhere. So
That's awesome.
there you go. There's a pro tip on podcasting for you guys for today.
Nice.
So I shared, our week and stuff. But what did you do? Did you have a good holidays? Did you have a good Christmas? Did you
Yeah,
do anything
yeah.
special? Did Santa bring you what you asked for?
Oh, well, yeah, the holiday was great. We actually ran a few sales. We had some, we really wanted to finish out the year strong. So, we were just like pulling out all the stops, biggest sale
Yeah.
of the year sort of thing, right?
Save the biggest for the last, huh? For the end of the year.
Yeah. Yeah.
right.
No, the week was great. Spent some time at the in-laws. Tried to take it easy a little bit, but I'm just like you. I can't ever sit still. So
I wouldn't really want it that, people ask like, oh, well, what do you plan to do when you retire? And I'm like, whatever I want, whenever I want. I mean, that's really
Yeah.
what it's about, right? Like, it doesn't mean that I don't necessarily want to have a business or do things that drive income, but it's obviously getting yourself to the point where you can just choose to be as involved or not, have backups, and do things out of desire, not out of necessity, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
hopefully admirable goals to shoot for. So then for wins, you guys, if you haven't heard before, we talk about we try to be positive. We try to lead off with like what were the wins for the week. I'm gonna go first because I always put you on the spot. I don't always, but I'll just say I mentioned that I had some deferred house maintenance stuff, which I don't know if you guys are like me. You have these things that are just always kind of like pecking at you like water torture around the house. Like I come home and I see it, and it's just always there. Like, hey, you need to do this. You need to do this. And so there was two major things. One was getting the baseboards put on. I've lived here 5 years and I haven't had baseboards for any of it. So getting the trim work done. So I got it all up. There's still, some putty and some paint and stuff like that, but it looks like infinitely better. So like I made some point in time, and that's an investment, you guys, in for me, in my mental well-being, my mental health.
Sure.
Because like it contributes to stress. You come home and you see things that you should be doing, and then you get down on yourself for not doing it. And so, really allocating time to do that, as much as we wish we could prioritize things like that, it's trivial. You would say it's unimportant in the big scheme of things, but like over time that adds up. And so I invested in my mental well-being in that regard. And then I did just some major rebuilding of the office, organization. I took your advice from some of our episodes in the past where we talked about organization. I went down to Home Depot. I got a bunch of bins. I found some ones that I liked that seemed nice and robust. And they're nice in size, so I could fit 4 on a shelf. And then I got out my label maker, and I like tore the place apart and put stuff in a bin. And it's not perfect, but it is far, far more perfect than it was. And it makes me feel good about being in my office again. So it's good. You should feel good in your own space and not run away. I think we should dig in more on the value of organization, like the untold values.
Of organization
absolutely. in the future. And I would love. I've tweeted in the past. I would love if there was like a Marie Kondo of like shop organization specifically. I mean, I guess there's nothing specific about like industrial grade organization, but obviously it has major impacts on the efficacy of your production and all that stuff. Like when and safety.
That is actually really cool. That would be a fun thing to see.
Somebody could really fill that void, right? But it's almost like you have to, like an industrial layout shop designer. I guess it depends on the space you're talking about, but I think there's some opportunity there. So if you're into organization and production, maybe that'd be a good little consulting thing, or I don't know, it's a business idea.
Like organizational systems engineering, if you will.
Sure.
Where you're organizing and engineering for a system as a whole instead of putting stuff in boxes.
That probably exists, right? Like, tell us in the chat if you guys if you've heard of that before, if that's a thing. I mean, it seems like there would just be a massive opportunity for stuff like that for anywhere from like small to medium business. I mean, even at large industrial setups, obviously, like where to put setting up workflow and all that stuff. I mean, obviously industrial engineering is a real thing, but I'm thinking maybe like somewhere more at the startup phase or smaller business. I don't know. I think no shortage of opportunity. Somebody Google that and see like shop organization and report back. Let's give some love to some people in the chat. Courtney, Filament Stories, good to see you this morning. Guys, tell us your wins while you're at it, while you're in here. What's something that you did? Maybe you did nothing and you took a holiday break, and that's a win for you. That would be good, but tell us. VastCNC, good to see you. Aaron F, man, rowdy crowd in the chat, as always. Today on the podcast, we are going to talk about the value of ideas.
Oh boy.
I got into it, as I sometimes do on Twitter earlier in the week, about to be fair, I was kind of, poking the bear a bit. One, because it's, Twitter and you're limited in your how much context you can give, but two, I said like, this is a pet peeve of mine. I've had people say like, oh, I've got this $1 million idea. I've got a $1 billion idea, whatever. Like, what do you think this idea is worth? And I've always been an advocate of ideas by themselves are worth nothing. The same way that a seed is not really the flower, right? Like it's like you need it to get the end product, but it's all the work that you have to do to nurture and grow it and stuff that really has that's where the value investment is. And of course you get people shooting back saying like, no, you can have great ideas and you can just sell ideas and not have to execute on them, and you can make money doing that. And I said,
okay,
I don't know, but we're gonna get into that today. I don't want to get dive in. I'm sure you guys have your thoughts and your feels and stuff, and we're gonna talk about obviously patents. Patent trolling is a thing. Like there are.
Ooh, that's a fun one.
Yeah. There's little subsets of this theme. That we can get into. But the guy that I really got into it with on Twitter was just, I'm so tired of hearing this trope that ideas have no value. Ideas have lots of values. Good ideas are very rare and they have immense value. And we traded a couple tweets back and forth, and I think the thing that was lost was the qualifier of ideas alone. Right? Like in a vacuum, an idea. Like I have an idea, you buy it from me. Is it a commodity? Can an idea be a commodity?
Interesting.
I say no. What do you guys say in the chat? Let's take our vote now. Let us know what you guys think. What do you think, Andrew? Like, let's start there.
I think certain ideas could potentially be a commodity. But it would be incredibly minute and very specific. I could provide, I think, some more. I could provide some more context. So I subscribe to that ideology. I think that you do. Like ideas are inherently worthless unless there's some value placed on the execution, or like all of the effort being put into turning that idea from just a brainchild into something of physical form, if you will.
Sure.
However, I would go back and say, my first startup, it was purely idea phase at the time when I started raising money. And the reason why it was purely idea phase is because it was physics. I had designed a specific type of heat exchanger that used a specific phenomenon of, basically a thermodynamic equilibrium, creating, these very interesting turbulent vortices in a fluid path. And it was all physics. And I basically built out the math and proved the equation. On paper.
Okay.
And see, that to me, you can call that as an idea, right? And that was what I presented and pitched and ended up going out and raising a ton of money for to build out a team. And, we had a valuation at first of like $10 million, with just the idea.
Did you patent this idea, or were you pre-patent?
I was
give us a sense
at
of
the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So what was it? Was it a white paper? Like, did you have like a prototype? Did you what did you actually have?
So it was a white paper.
It was
a white paper. So one then could argue saying, well, the idea was the concept, right? Of, oh, hey, could we create a better heat exchanger by using this fluid flow? One could say that's the idea. And then the execution of the idea is proving out on paper whether it works. And again, that's kind of, an interesting like chicken or egg sort of thing. Like, how do you define, is it an idea or is it, more than an idea?
So,
right?
Okay, now I want to push back because this is where I think that a lot of the semantics maybe of it can come in. But
sure.
I would argue what you are describing is common. Certainly, there are people that have ideas and they either patent or they don't patent, but they go pitch venture capital and stuff like that, and they seek investment, and then they look at that. So in your case, you had a valuation. You actually did some fundraising, right? So you were able to get money based on this idea without any of that, or were there qualifiers before you were able to get a dollar? So I want to understand when the money changed hands in terms of assigning the value.
Sure. So at first there was my first raise was for $150,000, and that
Okay.
was purely just hypothetical research. And I got that on a convertible note. And this is, we can dive into on another episode of like mechanisms for raising money. But the idea was it was a promissory note that I would either pay back the $150,000 or it would convert to equity at some other point in time. And, they would get shares in the company.
Okay.
So the concept was that I had this idea, and it was at the time I had made out a white paper and drafted it up and saying, this is the physics of the idea. This is how it works.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure we can turn this into a real product.
Okay.
And so that's what I then took out and pitched. And there were later iterations where I would take it and develop it a bit further, and then I would raise more money.
Okay.
But it was a progression. It wasn't all at once.
All right. So two things. One, you did execute
Mhm.
somewhat. Like you had to
Mhm.
create. Like there was work involved. You didn't just go and take a raw idea and say, "Hey, Bill, I've got this idea. Give me money so I can go do it."
Sure.
Right. So there was
Yeah.
some work. Now,
Sure.
granted, like
Absolutely.
you didn't build the business, you didn't do a prototype and all that stuff. So I understand like the degree of execution, but like you
Mhm.
always have to have some kind of execution. The other thing I would say is the value that was placed on
Mhm.
that idea is conceptually like idea futures, right?
Yep.
It's
Yep.
somebody investing in the odds that you will make it valuable, right?
Absolutely.
So the idea by itself doesn't have the value. It's the promise of the execution on the
Mhm.
future idea that has the value,
Absolutely. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
then that's where I keep pushing back. I'm like, the idea
Mhm.
itself can't be. I mean, there has to be in the history of time. I guess there may have been somebody that was just like, I'm going to tell you an idea and you're going to give me money for it, but I doubt it.
Yeah.
Like there has to be something on the execution.
Sure. And I will say, like, in the early conversations that we were having when we originally raised the money, it was about it was protecting the idea. So with ideas, they're kind of defined as intellectual property. So they're kind of intangible things
They
that
are,
we
yeah.
can't like physically touch or hold or like assign a specific value to easily. And so we call that just in general intellectual property.
I can agree.
And as a part of raising this money, these people were investing in that idea and quotes here of the intellectual property.
Sure.
And so they were betting. And so this is again where I think there's semantics and there's pushbacks on both sides because I agree with your argument, Pooch, about saying, well, I'm putting execution into forming the idea further. There are pieces where you could take it to a patent stage where it's an intellectual property where yes you put the work into getting the patent. They're not easy. I've got several patents. It's a pain to go through that process,
Yeah.
but once you do it, then you have essentially the blueprint for the idea.
Yep.
And ways of which how it works or the process of manufacturing or the process of basically everything, defining it out specifically down to where anyone else can recreate said idea
Mm-hmm.
and provide the execution. So it's a blueprint, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And you could say, well, okay, that's an idea still because you haven't actually put in all of the execution. You put in a bare minimum amount
Yeah.
to get to a point,
Yeah.
right? So it's an interesting toss up, right? I think it's a balance where there's two sides to this
Certainly.
coin,
It's
if you will.
it's nuanced and a lot
Mhm.
of it may depend on your definitions of stuff and semantics and whatnot.
Sure.
But that's I find these kind of
Mhm.
conversations interesting. So in the scope of patents,
Mhm.
patents absolutely have value, and I think part of the reason
Mhm.
that people like take an idea and they want to patent it is because that reservation of the idea,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
That you have the rights to make this idea into something of value before anyone else, right?
Mhm.
That certainly has value. Um,
Yep.
I would never argue that you can just be profitable for. I mean, you can't have one without the other. You need some
Sure.
idea to execute on. You need some kind of plan to execute on. You can't just be like
Sure. Yeah.
willy nilly working with no goal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, But the argument I always make is like you can have far more success taking a moderately decent to even a poor idea and executing well on it than you can have an idea and do nothing with, right? So if you're looking at the overall scope of value and where the
Sure.
value lies, and like looking at people that have built business, like part of why the world feels so unfair to me is that too many terrible people can have too much success with
Yep.
bad ideas, with bad, I mean, like
Yep.
people that have made millions, billions off of disinformation and you know,
Sure.
scamming and all sorts of other stuff, right?
Sure.
So to me, that's an argument toward like it's actually executing and having some vision and marching towards something that really is going to get you the furthest.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, you know, again, even still having taken that route of formulating an idea, building out a white paper, kind of building out the proof, and then eventually leading to a prototype. You know, it was about the execution, and you know, as I unlocked higher levels of funding and higher levels of, and again, finger quotes here, success. You know, it was about the execution. It eventually switched from, instead of the idea, to really about how we were executing on said idea. How are we going to turn it into a product? How are we going to make money? How we were going to turn it into an actual business? Because an idea itself, it cannot be a profitable business because it does nothing. It requires that execution piece in order to become a business, right?
Right.
That's kind of fundamental.
Right.
Yes, you could potentially, and this is where it gets into patent trolls, where you have an army of people coming up with ideas and saying, "Oh, hey, this is really interesting. We want to reserve the right to pursue this.
Yeah.
We're gonna, you know, create a walled garden," and
Yep.
then you take those and sell those blueprints. But then I would still argue that's a method of work. You're putting in value
You're doing
into,
some work. Okay, so
yeah.
pause for a second. And again, this
Mhm.
might feel very elementary to a lot of you guys, but go. You mentioned patent trolling. So for those of you not
Mhm.
familiar with the term, will you define what patent trolling is?
Sure. So this is a concept where you would have someone or a team of people that sit down and think through ideas. It's kind of like a brainstorming trust, if you will,
Mm,
a thought trust,
the
where
brain
you would come
trust.
up with these ideas. You would look at kind of markets, where things are going. This has happened in quantum computing a lot, and that's kind of one of those newer hot topic things. Also in AI and software, a
Mm-hmm.
lot, because
Mm-hmm.
again, we start sitting here thinking, oh, what's the potential? What could this lead to?
Mm-hmm.
And you get some smart people in a room, they can come up with some really cool ideas and some thoughtful pieces to execute on those. Maybe it's an algorithm, maybe it's a way for cooling a, you
Sure.
know, a wafer down subatomic, you know, like way down, you know, absolute zero, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And you would then create a patent and say, hey, I now own this idea,
Right.
again in finger quotes.
Right.
And you would have to, like with the patents, US patent law, you don't have to prove that your idea is actually capable of ever functioning.
Yeah.
But you have to at least provide that it is unique and a non-obvious solution. That's the biggest test to a patent, is can
Novel.
someone else, yes, can someone else who's an expert in this field arrive to you know, arrive to this on their own through an obvious mean, or is it more so a really, like, hey, you have to put something novel, you have to really, like, this is the piece, this is the main component, and that's ultimately what you're going to patent and claim.
Right.
And so essentially you would have this trust of people that would make these patents of these novel, unique, and non-obvious solutions and say, hey, these are ours. And then they would try and prevent other people from being able to go and develop those. A lot of times what we saw, like with Apple, there were several landmark
Mm-hmm.
cases
Mm-hmm.
where, you know, companies designed an algorithm or a way of which, you know, computers would compute, you know, bits or, you know, specific pieces of software.
Right.
And, you know, then Apple would use that, but they came up to their own solution, but it was still kind of infringing on this patent. And
Mm-hmm.
then they would sue and then collect a big payday,
Yep.
you know, at the end of it. And
Yep.
that's how they make money. They're just trolling. Essentially, they're coming up with these ideas. They wait for someone to cross the bridge. They come out and then they like,
You
give me
pay
all
the
your money.
fine. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's basically what I'm hearing is like the equivalent of somebody just calling dibs on an
Hmm.
idea without any
Yep.
intent to really ever do it. They're just waiting, right? They're literally waiting under the bridge for somebody to come by, and it's so frustrating as an entrepreneurial type where you're actually trying to do something, and so a lot of the part of like starting up a business is like doing your discovery, your research, your competitive analysis, your patent research. Like that's why patent lawyers exist, like hiring people to like actually research so that you don't unwittingly wander upon one of these bridges that's going to potentially stop you in your tracks. But it feels really unfair, right? Because somebody's just literally sitting on the idea. It's also the equivalent of like, so I was a web developer for years and years and years. People that squat on domain names, right? They're like, I'm going to snatch up this domain name and I'm not going to build a website on it, but I know at some point somebody's going to want crazyunicycles.com, and so I'm going to sit on it, right? And lo and behold, somebody invents like this awesome crazy unicycle, and they want to sell it, and oh yeah, sure, you want it? It's going to be $100,000 or 200, whatever it might end up being. And it doesn't feel fair. Is it fair? Is that an idea? Is that really like coming up with an idea? No, you just called dibs on it. I don't know. Push back on me, guys, if you think that that's right or wrong. I mean, obviously there are people that make their money, and it doesn't have to be a trust of people either. There are individuals that make a living of this. It exists in the legal world too. I've found out there are lawyers that will do research on like upcoming legislation and new laws and stuff like that, especially when it comes to things like civil rights cases or districting or rights and stuff. And if they find that a city is not in compliance with a new law or whatever, then they can actually bring suit, find a class action to put together, bring suit, and basically create a legal nightmare. And then, as the lawyer that headed up the thing, they just like make money on the fact that they have to force compliance from stuff. So there's examples of these types of things in our world all over the place, which just feels really crummy, man. Like, I hate that. That's a bit of a digression, but I mean, it feels somewhat related, I guess, to me.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I kind of agree in that, it's kind of related. It's a little bit different in that, again, we could potentially trying to assign a value of like, domain names or something like that, where there is, kind of an inherent value and maybe in some cases, but it's still arbitrary.
But it's future value. It's futures,
it is future value,
right? It's like the domain name by itself has no value. It's when you have a big company and you know that you're going to have a bunch of eyes on it, but until somebody makes the thing that gives the domain the value.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree there.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I guess does defining the value of ideas as idea futures, is that a good analogy?
I think so, because let's look at it like this. In physics, we have potential energy and kinetic energy. Kinetic energy, right, is the energy in motion. It's we're getting work out of it, right? We can extract that. That's the execution.
We're moving, we're doing stuff. We've got energy. Yeah, okay, good. We're applying energy, or we're taking energy.
Yeah,
all right.
But potential energy, right, it has value in some cases. And in physics, it's easier because it's not a perfect analogy here. We can define the amount of value in the energy, the potential energy it has. Like, say we have a mass and we move it up, on top of a hill. We know how big that mass is, and we know how high it is on the hill, and therefore we know how much potential energy it has.
Right.
With ideas, we could say, well, hey, this idea could be a monster, meaning it could be way up there.
Sure.
And it's trying to figure out how could we extract the execution of that conversion of potential energy to kinetic energy. We don't know how big the mass is, and we don't know how high it is. But if we can start putting some planning around and we start executing on it, we can start defining that. And that's where we start putting work in, saying, okay, well, hey, we believe that this idea is, capable of impacting 10 million people or
Yeah.
100 million people.
Yeah.
And it has the potential of generating $100 million in revenue. Well, okay, now we're starting to execute because we're putting a little bit more thought into it, right? We're
Right.
starting to find the situation. And then we're starting to say, okay, well, what's the best plan of action to execute to extract this value? Because we don't know if the hill has some valleys or peaks along the way, or if we
Sure.
have to take turns. All of that's going to extract or keep us from actually getting that kinetic energy out as we release it down the hill.
That's a
So,
really cool metaphor. I like that a lot. And you can see there's some interesting extension of that too, right? So patent trolls or
mhm,
people that make a living out of just basically IP farming,
mhm,
you know,
yeah,
they're putting a bunch of rocks at the top of a bunch of hills, right? And hopefully
yep,
one of them, it's a shotgun approach, right? They're
yep,
they're hoping somebody is going to come along at some point and they're going to be
and
able to
knock that
sell.
rock down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but without those people, and that
Mhm,
and that I think gets back to why it feels so crummy, because it involves
mhm,
using other people to give it the value, right?
sure.
Like,
Yeah.
I write down my $1 million idea. I literally have a list, a doc of million and $1 billion ideas or whatever. I don't know, but dollar value ideas and stuff like that. And I get so frustrated because it's like, oh, that's a really good idea. That would be great. I want to do that. And then I'm constantly tormented because I'm like, well, maybe I should spend my time developing that, or maybe I should spend my time developing that. That would be really fun.
Sure.
And a lot of them have nothing to do with what I'm doing now, but it's like something I'm
Yeah.
passionate about, or I really want it to exist, right? Because it solves a problem that I have that I know other people have as well. And
Mhm.
you hear that famous quote. Was it Eli Whitney? Who was it that said like everything that's significant that can be invented has been invented, and it was like the turn of
Oh,
the
yeah, I know what
19th
you're I
century.
don't know who made it, but I know that
Yeah.
quote.
I
Mhm.
mean, that is the biggest crock of crap ever. Like, there are
Yeah.
so many opportunities on a daily
Yeah.
basis if you just like look for them.
Yeah.
Um, the real brilliance though is when you can find people, because it's a skill, being able to pluck out good ideas and then
Mhm.
marrying those up with people that can execute on them. So I think you see a lot of partnerships and a lot of businesses develop in that way, because a lot of the idea guys aren't necessarily the same
Mhm.
execution people.
Well,
What do you
yeah,
think?
and you actually bring up a really interesting point. And there's a fantastic book called The Founder's Dilemmas,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of dive into this whole aspect of what is an idea worth, and how do you like kind of assign a value to this, and as a whole build as an entrepreneur a company around. The author, he talks about several different ways of which founders commonly associate value. You have those that kind of associate the value with the idea, right? And they reward equity based off of the merit of the idea, how much potential the idea has.
Yep.
But there's other founders that say, hey, I'm going to warrant based off execution. I have this idea and I'm executing. Let's give some value to those that want to help me execute, like walk the walk,
Right.
instead of just talking the talk. Because again, we can all sit around in a room, share drinks, and have a good old time and talk about $1 billion ideas. But
Yep.
until one of us gets up and starts walking down that path saying, hey, could we put some more effort into this? Those ideas are just kind of floating out there in the ether, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
That is a great book, and I'm throwing the link. No Wasserman.
awesome.
I'm throwing the link in the
Yeah.
description for anybody that wants. There's an Amazon link if you want to check that out. I got the audiobook because
Hmm.
I'm a big fan of actually. Here's another pro tip for life hacks if you're like me. I do the Whisper Sync Kindle with audiobooks so that I can
Oh,
do a little
nice.
bit of time where I'm reading, but it syncs up and I can listen to it. So 90% of the stuff I read is actually read to me, and then I'll like there's times where I just like I really want to sit down with the Kindle and read as well, 'cause it helps me
Hmm.
wind down at the end of the day and stuff like that. So that's
Yeah.
for those of you who want to try something different. But that was a great. You recommended that to me
Hmm.
early on, and we've talked about Michael Collins and Good to Great
Yep.
and Built to Last and
Yep.
some other good ones and stuff. But they're entrepreneurial classics.
Yep. Yeah.
Canon, if you will.
Yeah.
Good reco there. But back to the idea at hand now. Taking the idea,
Hmm.
let's let's go a little bit further, because we talk about patent trolling, we talk about like, it doesn't feel
Sure.
fair, and why there feels like there's conflict, and we've talked about what like inherently seems to give value to the stuff. Maybe it's the future potential of the idea, the potential
Sure.
energy, like you've said. Like that's really good. What's the point of talking about this in your mind, though? Why do you think I'm pushing this? Why are we here, class? Why are we here?
Well, I mean, it's certainly an interesting topic. I'm there's definitely people, I think, on both sides of the fence where, again, they assign that value to the idea. I created this by thinking it up. Without me, this you wouldn't be able to do what are capable of doing, because I'm the one who had the idea. And I don't know if I personally subscribe to that, because again, like, an idea it really is intangible. Yes, you could be critical in the development, and this is what I was saying before, is like, I was, unique, and I'm not trying to like praise myself here, but I was unique in that I was capable of figuring out this equation that made this specific type of fluid flow and this phenomenon. And I discovered this, but I discovered this because, it was a culmination of all of my other life experience up to that point, my education, my schooling, my research, everything else. So maybe I had the idea, but also at the same time, I had the idea because other people had ideas that were similar, and I just found the right way, potentially. Now, again, I don't know. Like, it's a tough one to answer, right? So why are you bringing this up?
Well, I bring it up because I feel like I've gotten some interesting questions and feedback over the years in terms of like, I like the idea of having a business, but I can't find the idea, right? Like, I think a lot more people struggle with the idea and the inspiration than I would have guessed, because that's never been a problem for me. And that's not a brag. Like I said, it feels more like a curse a lot of the time. And I would argue a lot of times when you get into entrepreneurial space, I think a lot of people are thinking like, oh, you've got to be an idea guy and an execution guy. I don't know if that's true. Like, I think that there are plenty of opportunities to partner with other people that like make up for the, your weaknesses. Like, I think there are a lot of people that are great with ideas that are terrible with execution, and I think and vice versa. And so, I bring it up because I want to talk about like this is really like the big bang of where businesses start to come together, right? Like you need that spark, right? The idea is the spark, and if it's a good enough idea, it's got enough power to motivate other people either to invest in you or to buy your product or to
you're
partner
absolutely
with you, right? And so it's like this is kind of like critical fuel to the whole equation. But I think a lot of people struggle with like, I don't know. So tell me in the chat, guys, if you're here, like, how many of you have had the desire to say start a business, or you think it'd be cool to like do your own thing, but you just really you don't feel like you have the idea? And how many of you feel like you've got tons of ideas, but you don't have the patience or the runway to execute on it or whatever? Just let us know where you're at. I'm curious to know, just informal survey. And I don't know. I think it's different for different people, and the path is never the same. There are people that are like, I am never going to have a partner. I am a solo person. Like, I can have good enough ideas that I can take far enough. I know in my history, like I've had like, I've had partners like in like early phases, like helping me on like the rep box that we did, like. Travis from A Pyro Design was like integral in that. Like, we sat down and both kind of said, hey, we have the same problem. And were it not for that moment, I don't think I would have felt like validated. I don't think either of us would have felt validated enough to try to pursue it. It would have just been another one of those like,
interesting.
It would have been
interesting.
It would have been neat. Since then he's kind of gone on to do his own thing and stuff, and we're still good friends. But and I'm not saying that you have to partner with somebody, but a lot of times like finding your people and getting some validation for your idea and stuff like that is what sometimes it takes to get the flywheel turning or the ball rolling down the hill or whatever you metaphor you want
Mm-hmm.
to go with. What about you? You have a partner. Like, did it require validation for you, or
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
would you've gone forward with Gloop without the other Andrew? If
Interesting. Yeah, so I remember the specific day in conversation that I had with Andrew about Gloop. It was it was an interesting thing because we were both kind of looking for just different opportunities. I had just kind of stepped away from the previous startup that I was running. Well, it was about a year or so later, give or take, and I was looking for something to do. And I remember, yeah, it was interesting because we both kind of had that spark. It was sharing of the idea with Andrew
right,
that really caused that, because I wouldn't even have started working on the formula for Gloop had it not originally been for Andrew coming to me asking for a solution to a specific problem he was having.
right,
And it was that moment that it started the conversation of saying, well, maybe other people would be interested in this. Maybe, it would behoove us to look into this. And,
yeah,
he started looking into it and saying, hey, yeah, no, this is interesting. And yeah, we reached, I guess, a critical mass between the sharing of the idea that
hmm
then culminated that spark that then ignited the fire, saying, okay, this is something we should go do. That's a really interesting piece that you bring up. um I couldn't say or if I would actually have gone and created Gloop on my own or not.
yeah.
It's hard to say. I mean, it wasn't, if it wasn't for Andrew having that specific problem, I probably wouldn't even have thought about it in the first place.
It's funny
you
because
know
I feel like that's a common thread in some of the conversations I've had with a lot of different people, and it's not necessarily even somebody that you've decided to partner with, but like our need to get
hmm
validation for the idea, whether it's from like a mentor, somebody you trust, like
hmm
bouncing that idea off, because it's so easy to get in your own head, like, oh, I think this is a good idea, but until you start like actually like trying to flush it out and say the
hmm
words out loud and understand that. Brian Vines in the chat brings up a really interesting point. He's, oh yeah, I've got these ideas from time to time, but then I talk myself out of it, and I've been
yeah.
guilty of that. But I think you got to be careful with that too, because it's very easy for you to talk yourself out of your own thing without really having. I mean, the
hmm
world is a very big place. And if
hmm
you feel like you've had this problem, there are 8 billion people on this planet. I guarantee you
Oh yeah.
that even a small, tiny percentage of them having the same problem is massive potential opportunity, right? But
Uh-huh.
we as business people are looking for, best bang for our buck. If I'm going to invest energy in pushing this thing down the hill, or getting it going
hmm
down the hill, I want to start with the thing that has the biggest potential, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
I mean, theoretically, it's like you want the let's see, the biggest rock at the steepest peak, right? So
Yep.
it takes minimal
Which it
effort
just
to
takes
get
a
it
little
rolling, and then it
knock.
goes.
And
Yeah,
yep.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Because we're inherently, I don't want to say we're inherently lazy, but of course it's like you want to maximize your efforts and stuff like that. But to go
Uh-huh.
back to the point, like getting validation is critical, and it is very validating when you pitch something to somebody and they go like, that's a great idea and I want to give you money for that, or that's a great idea and I want to do it with you. I mean, those
Uh-huh.
are big validators in my
Mhm.
mind.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
what's the flip side of that? Well, if I share my idea with people, they might steal it.
Yeah. Yep.
Talk about that for a
Yeah.
second. Talk about the fear of protecting the idea and
That's
why
that's a
patenting
really
exists and all
interesting
that
one,
stuff.
because I remember specifically, back when I was starting, my first startup. I was 18, 19 years old. I was, basically
Wunderkind.
a kid still,
Yeah.
right? And I had come up with this idea and I was so worried that people were going to steal it. And we had several talks of like, oh hey, what if the big guys get wind of this and they're just going to steal it and then they'll squash us. And a lot of times that was paralyzing, because we were like, well, we can't do this, we can't move this until we get the patent on it, and we have to spend all this money on getting the patent to make sure we're protected before we even go out and start raising money or telling people or
Yeah.
talking with the venture capitalists. And
You've killed
it was
MVP at this
paralyzing.
point. Oh yeah, yeah. Paralysis by
Yeah,
analysis goes
yeah,
against. We've talked about minimum viable product before because we want to do all the
and
things. Yeah.
yeah, it wasn't until much later on where, we started just saying, you know what? This doesn't matter. Like, let's just do it. We are going to be,
Do
you know,
it.
yeah, we are going to be valued by the execution of the idea, not by the idea itself.
Yep.
And we had to start showing how the idea performed in comparison to what was the status quo. And it was at that moment that things actually started to move. The rock was greased enough where it started to roll,
Yep.
or we had enough leverage, or whatever it was. And yeah, so I will say, like, you can be careful about sharing your idea with anyone,
Yeah.
especially if it's kind of a nominal idea where it requires, like, not a whole lot of custom work. It's, like, oh, take this widget and stick it together. Sure,
Yeah.
you can be a little bit protective, want to make for sure, like, hey, you're going to share this with people that are going to give you valuable feedback and aren't going to be like, hey, well, if I do it first and I have the ability to execute on it, I'm going to go take it.
Right.
But I will say sometimes it's just better just to share the dang idea,
Well,
you know?
yeah, because again, the idea by itself doesn't have any value, and it doesn't
Mhm,
show anybody. It's so much easier to show people things, demonstrate
mhm.
value, than it is to
Yep,
explain value, right?
yep,
And if you, I mean, you've had experience talking to venture capitalists and stuff, and a lot of the
mhm,
stuff I've read about VCs and the ones I've talked to, the number one
mhm,
failing of people pitching ideas is
mhm.
that they just all they have is like an idea, and if you
Yeah,
want people to give you money, like you need to give them confidence that you can actually
yes,
execute on the idea, right? You
yeah,
don't just get to walk into Sierra
yep,
Capital or whoever and just be like, here's an idea, give me money for it so I can execute. And they're like, no, no, no. Who's on
yep,
the team? And it's very like protected, right? Like that's their precious
mhm,
resource. And like you said, like maybe it starts as a small convertible note. And that's why like angel investing and things like, you start to see
mhm.
those big rounds of investment when you're, your A round, your B round,
Yes,
like when you're actually moving, right?
mhm. Yep, exactly. Well, it makes me think of that meme, right? It's the idea, the question mark, and then the profit. So many people, they get stuck on this. Okay, well,
Yeah.
it's like, I've got this idea and I'm going to profit from it,
Step
but it's the
three, step two,
question mark.
profit. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, the thing that's, not answered. That's the solution
Yeah.
to
You're
get you to the
glossing
profit.
over a really big piece right here, this question mark. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So to bring this back, I guess, full circle a little bit. I do believe that ideas, they have some form of value, but I guess it's the interaction of that idea with the other people that are going to help you execute on it, and the sharing of idea that really start to assign that value, and then allow you to start moving that boulder. Right?
Right.
This idea might be huge. You
Right.
might have come up with a monster, but you're going to need people to help you push.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and that exploration process may take you a completely different direction and show you things that you haven't thought of. Like
Hmm.
you just like you don't know what you don't know until you start to go down the road. And
Hmm.
Mike in the chat brings up an interesting point. The balance of sharing product design ideas with others to get validation. Others in the community are taking your idea, and it's okay. So the concept of sharing versus gatekeeping.
Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
Now, obviously, there's a big difference between like getting together with a couple people you trust and then just throwing something out on the internet and seeing what everybody says,
Uh-huh.
because internet's going to internet as it were, and you're
Yep.
going to have people telling you're an idiot and all
Hmm.
sorts of other stuff. So you have to be kind of mindful, I think, about how you go about vetting these things. But
Sure.
I think going through the process has an immense amount of value, right? And
Hmm.
more value than the potential of fear instilled by the thought that somebody might steal your idea or it might be lost. Like that's because
Hmm.
that's always going to be a risk. Granted, you don't want to
Hmm.
give people the blueprints to just to
Hmm.
take it,
Yep.
but
Yeah.
let's tie it into open source here for a second, because like that's
Hmm.
I think there's a
Oh.
ton of people,
Hmm.
especially in the 3D printing space and the software world and stuff like that, big advocates of open source, right? Because it's like, look,
Hmm.
together we can make something even greater and all that stuff. And we want to believe there's more of an altruistic thing. Like we're a group of people that have passion around the same thing, and we just want to see the technology succeed and grow. And that has more value to us than the commercial value, which I think is somewhat of a fallacy, because there are plenty of companies that make money on open source product and stuff, but it's a completely different mindset. It's a completely different value proposition
Sure.
as well, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, open source, it's an idea, but it's also coupled with that execution, because you had someone who was executing on that idea, and then it inspired someone else to help execute
Right.
on that idea, or allowed someone else to leverage that execution to get something else off the ground.
Right.
That's kind of that altruism piece of the open source. Is you're sharing the idea and you're sharing your execution, and you're saying, hey, this is the tool, this is the widget that I've made, and then it helps someone else potentially get their widget off the ground.
Sure.
We're collectively moving the needle for everyone.
Yeah, like crowdsourcing execution, I guess, to some extent.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
and again, like a lot of times, like these types of projects start like because they're fun, and because people just are like they're passion projects, and a lot of people don't have any interest in the mechanics of actually like making it a business, right? Like they don't want to. I don't want to deal with documentation and customer support and all that stuff. So like a lot of open source stuff is lacking in that regard, because those are the not
Sure.
fun parts, and if you want to benefit from it, you have to help figure it out, right?
Sure.
But yeah, I don't know. Like I said, there's no right or wrong way, and there's
Yeah.
still a lot
I
of
mean,
value and things that you can build on top of, right?
yeah, absolutely. Well, let's look at some of those open source, kind of projects, like, Prusa's. They're all open source, right? And Prusa's built an amazing business on something that's completely open. Like, if you want to go build your own, you absolutely can. But
Mhm.
it's a really interesting, idea and concept, where you're taking something and you're executing on this idea. And the value of Prusa is all about that execution, not so much the printer itself or the ideas of the open source.
Sure.
It's the whole ecosystem of that execution that they've been building for a decade or more, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess it all comes back again to that execution. It's more than just the initial idea.
Well, and this, maybe this is preempting a future conversation again, but this goes back to my comment that the value of having an audience and a community is far greater than the idea and the
Sure.
product itself. I mean, or well, it's best suited when it's all combined, right? But those that believe in running an open source business model and stuff like that are leveraging being a good participant in a community and giving back and being built and having that audience that they can in turn sell to. And they're adding something to it that just makes life easier than everybody making their own, right? So in the concept of like a Prusa 3D printer, yes, it is open source, but there's a lot of parts on it that are just not practical for most people to build, nor do they have the time or the desire or the energy or have the ability to buy in bulk to make it affordable.
Sure.
So there's like a lot of great ways that you can actually take ideas like this and like turn it into stuff. But where people miss the mark a lot of times on this is where they go and try to snatch it up and then close it off, right?
Yep.
And the community
Exactly.
very, very quickly can see what's happening, and then they dismiss and you lose that legitimacy and that audience that gave you your reputation, that gave you your crowd to sell to.
Absolutely.
I don't know. Does that make sense to you guys? Like, and again, this is not the model for everyone. Like, people that are super into patenting and protecting IP are generally not they're not fans of open source, right? Because they're like, come on, like, who's really making?
They're kind of
money?
at
They're
odds,
like,
right? Yeah.
well, they're kind of at odds, and statistically, it's a fair point that it's like, look at private companies that have how much money they've made and over the years and how big they can get as compared to those that are open source based, right? You're just,
Sure.
it's a completely different mindset and mechanism and maybe growth potential. I don't know. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's why we're seeing, I know I've had some conversations with people who are like, I don't know if we're going to keep doing open source because, the community, if the community doesn't really defend that and support that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
then you
Well,
lose your competitive advantage a lot of the time, right?
yeah, because then you're giving up this unique potential of the idea piece, and you're giving the blueprint, your execution, and you're allowing someone else to steal that execution and then create their own and then wall it off. And if
Right.
there isn't a pushback of that, then all you're doing is you're giving your competitors the competitive advantage against yourself.
Right.
And how do you succeed?
Yep.
Right? It's a zero sum game in that point.
Yeah. So we've talked about patenting. We've talked about open source. There is a third option that's in the middle, and Grant points that out. The concept of trade secret. I believe Gloop is a trade secret, right? It's not
Yeah.
patented.
Yeah. Yeah.
Coke is is the most popular, trade secret that's out there. You protect the recipe, right? You can have an idea, and
Yep.
if it's something that's not easily reverse engineered, that may be a good path to go for your idea. Talk about trade secret for a moment, if you would.
Yeah. So trade secret is a really interesting one because I view it as a hybrid, if you will. A lot of so patents and patent law, they don't really like trade secrets because the idea of patents was to share the idea with everyone in exchange for a short-term monopoly so that the information wouldn't be lost or held up by some company or organization, if it were to either go under or the founder die. So it
Right.
was a way of progressing everything forward.
Right.
But also at the same time, giving you that advantage, the competitive advantage. Whereas a trade secret comes in, it's kind of this unique hybrid that you're not sharing how you make the secret sauce. But you're sharing, you're creating the product and you're distributing that, and you're creating kind of an ecosystem around it. In ways which, like, look at the beverage industry or other like adhesives industries. Again, a lot of these companies, the reason why they choose this trade secret versus a patent is chemistry and physics and a lot of this other stuff. It doesn't change. it's
Yeah.
it's consistent throughout time. And so if you give up a blueprint to how to make something and chemistry doesn't change, effectively you're guaranteed this short-term monopoly. But at the end of the day, someone else can then take your formulation, make it, and maybe they are better at making it than you are. Maybe they are capable of making it cheaper. They go to an area where there are less regulations, are less laws, and
Yeah.
they can produce it far cheaper, and then they beat you at your own game.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting balancing act. Like Gloop, we chose the trade secret route because we synthesize our chemical compounds and our adhesives from raw materials. It's expensive to do that, but we also know that chemistry doesn't change once it's physics, it's chemistry, it's fundamental laws. And so we didn't want to provide a patent or anything else, so that if we are able to make that empire of sticky,
Yep.
that the big guys aren't capable of just taking it and making it and say, oh hey, here's the solution. We put our value in all of the community that we're trying to build, and the products, the high quality things that we're trying to release, and in hope being able to continue that cycle, right?
Yeah.
We're not trying to deceitfully lock things up or prevent other people from doing it. It's a method of trying to say, hey, I'm trying to create a business, trying to make money, because that's what businesses are used for. And as a
Sure.
part of that, we're going to make new things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's how do you balance the equation, because the equation has to be balanced in some way.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you what, man. We covered a ton of ground today.
Yeah, we did.
We talk about ideas, where they get their value from, how that compares to executing on the idea, what to do with the idea, and how to potentially protect the idea once you've gone there. Whether or not you need partnership, or how do you extract maximum value from that, or how do you give yourself the confidence that you need to march forward? It's very clear that the ideas are the spark, but the engine requires fuel to run long term as well. So the spark, here we go, metaphors all over the place, right? It's like you need the spark to get, ignition and all that stuff, but you got to have a gas tank, you got to have fuel, you got to keep moving, you got to have that potential energy, and you got to put energy into the system as well in order to really, really have that value.
Sure.
So that's my position on it. My conclusion. I think that it's an interesting notion trying to assign value. Like, and it would be a fun exercise. I would love nothing more than to just sit around and think up about ideas and then have people pay me for it. I guess there are probably companies that are hiring engineers to do just that. But that takes experience and time and all that. And you still got to do some work, and that you got to document and you got to do, so it's just a question of how much energy you're putting into it. Right. Yeah. It would be great though. Just sit there and just like, hey Bill, got an idea? That'll be $500, please. So then you just give them, call them up the next day and just bank those ideas, man.
I love it. Man,
somebody wants to pay me for ideas, I'll give you tons of very, very potentially lucrative ideas, and I'll sell them to you cheap. Guys. That's a solid 60, guys. Another Maker That Money in the can. The last episode for 2022. I don't know about you, Andrew, but I had a lot of fun this year. I just seeing this evolve. I'm excited for some of the stuff we're going to be working on next year to kind of grow the reach a little bit more, to try to add some production value to things. But as always, tweet at us, emails, all that stuff. You can find us at our respective websites or on Twitter or anything like that. We love your ideas. If you want to be on, if you have a topic idea that you want to talk about, let us know. We're always looking for more things to talk about. We're both very passionate about being makers and entrepreneurs at the same time. And as always, my disclaimer, we don't claim to have it all figured out. We're still learning as we go. And we could be big frauds and failures ourselves. Who knows? But must be doing something right. We're still here after 5-6 years each, and 4 years. Let's see. I can never keep it straight with you. You're on your 4-year anniversary, right?
We're 4 years going on 5. So yeah.
I mean, you start to show some longevity, and people think, okay, maybe this guy knows what he's doing. We'll see. But I wish everyone a fantastic weekend, a fantastic end of their year, a fantastic new year, and we will catch you next Friday for another exciting episode of Maker That Money podcast here with Pooch and Andrew. Until then, guys, so long. Be well.
See ya.
Bye-bye.